Okay, it's kind of a funny story. Actually, I didn't mean to write the book. What happened was, um, people knew I had this pretty serious bout of depression in my late teens and early 20s. And back when I was in grad school, a lot of people were like reaching out to me, asking me for help, how I got through it. And
Okay.
I ended up writing them a bunch of emails. Invariably, they lost the emails. And so then I had to like keep resending them. And then when the pandemic came around, the same thing was happening. People were asking me, hey, this is kind of taking a toll on me mentally. What did you do to get around this? I know we know you kind of turned your life around and you've employed these different tactics. What did you do? And I joked. I said, because when I would talk to people, again, they would lose the material. And I joked, I said, I should just write a book. And finally, one day I was like, you know what? It's actually not a bad idea. So it was just like
Yeah.
this totally organic thing where I sat down and banged this thing out within a few weeks. And it was really just to document it for my friends. And then next thing you know, some members were getting interested. I'm a personal trainer like you, and some members were getting interested, and not and just kind of it kind of took off on its own. It was a very organic thing. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So it was like the message you're typing out these emails, and all of a sudden you're like, I keep saying the same thing over and over again. I'll just document it,
Yeah,
make it
that's really
official.
what it was. And anything that I was leaving out, that was the time to write it. So I
Nice.
just threw it all together. Yeah.
Cool. What, how, and I'm curious about that with your background as a trainer and going through, recovering from depression. And forgive me if I'm, saying anything that isn't right. Go ahead and correct me, because
Okay.
I
Right on. Of
I don't want my intention not to be offensive at all.
course.
But
No, no, it's
I
okay.
want to help share this message because I think it needs to be shared for sure. Um, how does that connection work? Do you feel like they're just two kind of separate silos in your life, or is there a pretty integral link between um, relief from depression and then what you're doing as a personal trainer?
There's absolutely a link. And to give you just a little bit of a background here, so when I went through that serious bout, it was pretty serious. And I'll give you a little bit of just for context. And this means
Sure.
nothing, but I'm 5'9", excuse me, 5'9" and 170 pounds. And I am a personal trainer. So it's not like I'm carrying around any fat. So what I'm carrying around is weight that I want. That's just to put things in context. So when I was going through the deepest, darkest parts, I was still 5'9", but I was 124 pounds.
Mm,
So um, the physical end of it was kind of what I saw as the first step.
mm,
Now, um, it that almost came to me by accident. I was playing in bands at the time. I ended up playing in a band with these dudes who were lifting weights, and they kind of talked me into it. And it was kind of like this cascading effect where it wasn't only that we always talk about the rush of endorphins when we're lifting weights, things like that. That did play a role, absolutely, but it was also uh, taking control of something.
mm,
It was seeing the actual growth. I could see that I'm making progress here. It wasn't just mental models where it's almost like ethereal.
mhm.
This was serious gains. I could see the number on the scale going up. I could see my abs forming. And it was also fun. I had something to look forward to. I remember being in bed and I was interested in things again. And I was reading, about bodybuilders and things like that. Uh, so that, along with all of that, along with this renewed sense of like self care, which was the first building block. And I talk about my whole journey as like blocks.
Okay.
And that physical, just the training aspect we'll get into right now, just that training aspect was absolutely critical when it came to my first building block. And that was where everything started. That was kind of like my home base. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we oftentimes get so hung up on what's going on inside, psychologically, emotionally. And
Yeah.
if once I get that fixed, I'll work on the outside stuff. But it sounds like the opposite may be beneficial. Hey, this might be easier to just take this little step, get control here, and things inside start changing. Is that right?
For me, it worked that way. Now everybody's a little bit different, right? For me, I liked seeing those concrete things. I liked seeing the muscle pile on, and I liked seeing that I was able to run X amount further. For some people, it may be the other way around. It may be some of these other things that I write about. But I feel like the magic is that compound effect. It's not just going to be the physical
Okay.
aspect, and it's not just going to be doing the diet. But you combine those two, okay, well, now we got something. And then you combine some mental models on top of that. Then you combine, the right supplementation on top of that. Okay, well, now we're really getting somewhere. Yeah,
Nice. Um, can we dive into mental models, like some
absolutely.
good models? Go for it. Tell me more about that.
Well, the mental models are actually the the hardest to talk about, not emotional reasons, but just because it gets a little deep.
Okay.
So before I forget, if anybody wants a chapter on the mental stuff, please, shoot me an email. It's just zackrutledge@gmail.com. Shoot me an email and I'll be happy to send that off as a free chapter if anybody wants to check that out.
Nice.
But that being said, there is a lot that goes into it. It's also, I think, the longest chapter in the book. Um, One thing we do need to be cognizant of, and I'll just give you a couple quick ones here. One thing we need to be cognizant of is how humans are wired for negativity. Our brains are wired for negativity. So we're always scanning for threats. So one of the things that I always try to keep in mind is, have you ever heard the story of the two wolves?
Remind me. Yeah, it
Okay.
sound familiar.
So yeah, so everybody needs this kind of tattooed into their brains right now. So the story of two wolves, it's an old Cherokee story. And this grandfather's walking with his grandson, and the grandfather's telling the grandson how there's two wolves that lives inside of all of us. One's the fear wolf and one's the courage wolf, and they're always at battle. So the courage wolf is like love, compassion, generosity, things like that, and the fear wolf is, of course, feed, uh, envy, greed, things like that.
Mm.
So the grandson says to the grandfather, "Well, if they're always at battle, which is the one that wins?" And the grandfather says, "The one you feed." And that's the story, right? So, but it's a profound story. It's simple, and it's the kind of thing where it's nice to check in on that. It's like, okay, am I feeding that courage wolf? Am I feeding that courage wolf? Because if we leave ourselves on autopilot, we tend to drift into that negativity, even if we're not
Mhm.
suffering from depression. We tend to be scanning for those threats and seeing those negative things, as opposed to practicing gratitude and generosity, things like that. So it takes effort, and that's just normal. So that's something we
Yeah.
need to recognize.
Nice.
Another quick one I'll just give to people, and
Yeah.
this is so silly almost. Um, but when I was very depressed, uh, I was easily overwhelmed just with daily life, easily overwhelmed. So still to this day, I have a sheet of paper every morning, and I'll write out I call them micro goals, right? So I'll have at the top of the list, I still do this every day. At top of the list, water. And then I drink my tall glass of water and I cross it off. Now I know I'm going to drink the water. It's not a big ask. But it's the first thing I do after I brush my teeth, and it's a guaranteed win. I get that physical feeling of crossing it out. Great, on to the next thing, and you just stack up the one thing at a time. Those little tiny micro goals. This actually just happened to me. Funny enough, the other day I was working on my car. I had to replace. I don't know how much all you guys know about O2 sensors, but I had to replace an O2 sensor. Something was seized
Okay.
up. I was getting super frustrated because I had to take off all these pieces, and I was like, hold on, hold on, one thing at a time. Let's go get the ratchet." You know what I mean? And just mentally breaking things down to those micro goals. It sounds silly, but it has a profound effect especially when you're in that bad mood, like working on a car, trying
Yeah.
to sort things out. So micro goals is another big one here. I'm a little more
Nice.
eloquent in the book, but if
Yeah.
anybody, like I said, if anybody has questions, just shoot me that email. I'll be happy
Yeah.
to send it to them. Yeah.
What when it comes to making that list, is that something that you would do like the night before? Do you have kind of like a template that you use every day? Is it
Yeah,
like get out of bed, write the list? How does that work for you?
well, this is slightly embarrassing at this point because I do have copies of it. I have
Yeah.
these things that I try to do every day, and I just use an old copy machine. I
Yeah.
make copies of the same list every
Okay.
single day. I do like to bring it into the physical world because I do feel like there's something to it. When it's in the world, it makes it more real, and I like the satisfaction of crossing things off. And that's
Yeah.
one side, is the things that I want to do every day that the repeated things. And
Yeah.
on the other side, I'll have whatever goals I'm working on right now. Like I told you just before the show, I just got married. So there were all kinds of wedding things I had to take care of. Of course, those are unique to that life circumstance, but
Yeah.
booking the DJ, cross it off, things like
Got
that.
it.
So I just kind of work off of a sheet of paper throughout the day. I just keep it in my bag, and it's actually really helped me. And of course, some people don't like working that way, but for me, it's really helped just clarify and then simplify in a way.
Yeah. So, and that got started, like you said, from feeling like I'm easily overwhelmed. I'm easily flustered, frustrated in this kind of default state. So let's start breaking
Yeah.
it down.
And
Small
believe it or
steps.
not, it came from working out. It came from working out. It came from writing out my workout plans and writing
Wow.
out um, how many reps am I doing? How many sets am I doing? I remember I would get flustered in the gym and it was like, hold on, let me just tick off every time I do a set. So then I remember how many sets I did. It's like, oh, well, doing this on paper actually works really well. Maybe I should. And then it just kind of
Nice.
bled into the rest of my life. Yeah,
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Um, I'm curious about feeding the courage wolf.
sure.
Do you mind kind of just if we go back to that? I think that would be really interesting to talk about some of the ways that you do, or those that you're able to help. Uh, what are the actions that we can take to feed that
Sure.
wolf?
Sure. Well, first, like I said, breaking things down into micro goals, because for me, seeing things accomplished probably for me is one of the biggest things that gets me uh energized, is seeing that I'm at least getting some things done, right?
Okay.
Um this controversial one, trying not to complain. Now, I say it's controversial because I don't feel like we should be holding things in. But when it comes to the little nagging things, right? Like not being able to find a parking spot. I used to live in Washington, D.C. I went to grad school there, and notorious for really bad parking situations in certain spots. And I was complaining the whole time, the whole time, the whole time. And it would just, you would feel the mood in the car change when I would be with my
Mm,
girlfriend at the time, now my wife. Um, but practicing, hey, just searching for the spot and just not complaining about it, right? It's not
okay.
being aware of what you're putting out there. That's
Mhm,
another way of feeding that courage wolf, because how many times have you been to a party where somebody makes some kind of, I don't want to say off color comment, but something that's a little weird and just kind of brings the tone into
mhm.
a different direction.
Yeah.
Or when the morale sinks at work because of just whatever, right?
Mhm,
So reminding yourself that you play a part in the tone as well, whether it's as simple as turning on music in the gym,
mhm,
or one of my favorite things is giving somebody else a pep talk. That always energizes me. Um, Something like that, or ask somebody what's wrong, things like that. And in a way, that's feeding the courage wolf as well,
mhm.
is just kind of taking that focus off of yourself and bringing it on others. That's actually, you'll have a real tough time feeding negativity when you start giving somebody else that positivity. It kind of
Yeah.
works both ways. You're also helping yourself too. Yeah.
Nice. You have a good way of simplifying the process, I think, and learning kind of the lessons from what you're experiencing. Like, hey, this is actually a thing. Like, I can imagine you as a trainer, you're helping someone else, and you notice like, hey, I'm feeling really good
I
instead of.
I I learned so much by becoming a trainer. That was just one of the biggest growth moments I had, was becoming the trainer and actually working with clients. But yeah, I'm a big fan of simplicity.
Yeah.
Um, I have a tendency to overcomplicate things like a lot of us. So I'm a big fan of keeping things simple. Yeah.
Nice. Cool. I'm curious, and maybe we hit on it already, but what what would you give as far as advice for someone who's feeling like, oh, this is stuff that I need. Um, what would you say would be the best first step for someone to begin using the tools that you've discovered in order to help find some relief?
Um, this I'm going to give you two answers for this, because
Okay.
one, I for me, like we talked about before, I like the physical aspect of things. If this were me and I had to do this over again, I would get a blood test, believe it or not, to check out not just my levels, because there is a correlation between low vitamin D and depression, not necessarily a causation, but there is some correlation there. But get tested for food allergies. Sounds crazy, right? But
Mhm.
there is a theory out there where a major source of depression is actually inflammation.
Mhm.
And if we're taking in things like dairy and dairy doesn't agree with us, or we're taking in things like wheat doesn't agree with us, we're only contributing to that inflammation. At the very least, we're going to get ourselves feeling a little bit better by dialing in the right foods that work for us. I don't think that there's a one size fits all diet for everybody, just because there are so many different allergies these days
Sure.
or intolerances. Um, I would start with that. Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Zach Rutledge, thank you so much for being on the show.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.